Hey everybody, movie reviewer next door here, and I'm back with another review. And this time I saw Closure, or the actual title, Straightheads. This is a revenge thriller film from 2004, directed by Dan Reed, and it stars Gillian Anderson, Danny Dyer, and Anthony Caff. In this film, there's an instant chemistry between Alice, a businesswoman, and Adam, a younger working class man who installs a security system in her London apartment. She takes him to a party in the country and they end up making love. But the night turns horrific when they encounter three thugs who maim Adam and rape Alice. The incident turns them into fearful recluses until Adam spots the leader of their attackers and the two victims plot a brutal revenge. So, what did I think of Straightheads, or Closure? Well, this is a film that I knew nothing about when I first saw it. I got this because it was cheap, and I recognized the three actresses. I haven't seen Windchill. I've seen Perfect Stranger. I'll have to watch it again. But Closure stuck out to me because when I looked it up, I found out it was a British thriller starring Gillian Anderson and Danny Dyer. Now, most people know Gillian Anderson um, for X-Files, and Danny Dyer is kind of a British actor that's very controversial, as a lot of people seem to fucking hate him. In this movie, though, I think both of them give great performances, and I think this is a fantastic revenge thriller. Now, it's apparently a very controversial movie. I'll talk a bit about why it might be, but overall, I think it treats the subject of revenge with respect. It's At no point do I think it jumps the shark and becomes a fantasy. It stays very grounded in reality. And by the end, you feel, well, I'd say satisfied and a little bit like overwhelmed emotionally because this is a hard film to watch. It is. And it does that without being exploitative of the subject matter or of Gillian Anderson, I think. But let me get to the cast. Gillian Anderson plays Alice, businesswoman. She gets, again, raped. The reason I'm saying this so matter of factly is because it is a review and I have to talk about it. Um, she's raped by these men, or this guy that's part of this group. Gillian Anderson is an actress. I haven't seen a ton of the films she's been in. I know she's been in quite a few films. She was in Johnny English Reborn. She was in the X-Files movie, Cricket House. Um, Apparently she was in The Pale Blue Eye. Haven't seen it. But I think she really works here as this woman who has basically lost control of her life in certain ways after the brutal attack, and I think she plays the trauma after the event very well. I think at no point do I think these actors overdo it, like that they overdo the acting or go too over the top. Um, and I think I really found it to be an interesting journey from how you get from her character from the beginning to the end, and also with Danny Dyer as um, Adam. Again, guy installs cameras for her in her house, and Danny Dyer is another one of those. Yeah, excuse me. He's an actor that gets a lot of shit. Apparently, a lot of people don't like his acting. I've seen him in the only film I can think of that I've definitely seen him in is Vendetta, which I thought was good. It had an interesting gimmick with how the kills were done, but overall just a fun revenge film that works. Somehow made for under $100,000, which I don't know. I don't know how Britain keeps doing this, but even though it's like really expensive to shoot in London apparently. But um uh Anthony Caff as Heifer. He's basically the main one of these rapists. He is the one who rapes Alice. And I think I'm glad they made the effort to make him not just like a sniveling villain. Like the others are kind of stereotypical like douchebag shithead types. Um but for him they made him a bit more of a human that while he didn't while he did rape her and he did force himself to rape her, they made it so that it wasn't just like, oh, he rapes every woman that he comes across or whatever. There's like a reason behind it that you learn in the film that kind of makes sense, but also is that's one thing I will 100% give this film. It doesn't make out any of these characters to be 100% what you think they'll be because you're expecting Danny Dyer's character to be the um I guess I'll do spoiler review. You're expecting Danny Dyer's character to be the character that's like, okay, from minute one, we have to get revenge. I have to protect my woman. And you're expecting Gillian Anderson to be the one that's like at the wayside and everything. But that's not what happens in this film. Again, spoilers. I actually do want to talk a bit more in depth about this film. Um, but that's not what you get. From the get go, you have Gillian Anderson and Danny Dyer, and Gillian Anderson at first is like, we can't tell the authorities about what happened to me. I don't want my job to be in jeopardy, which is a thing that women do have to worry about. If something like that happens, even in America, people do tend to look at them differently. I'm not trying to be feminist in a feminist way about this, but it is just a truth. Most women will try to they'll work their entire lives to gain that power, like in a business, and she is seen as a powerful woman by her peers. And if she were to come out about that to everybody, they'd possibly very possibly look down upon her. And she's like, "No, I can't let him get away with this. He raped me." And she's the person who wants to initiate the revenge. And Danny Dyer's character is kind of like, "Yes, I know what they did to you, but I can't go through with this." And I liked that. It made you actually think about the the thoughts they're having about revenge and about sorry the camera keeps messing up and about like what they want to do about the situation and how they should approach it. And I actually like that about this type of film that it's not like just I can enjoy a film like the excuse me, I Spit on Your Grave remake because I hate the original I Spit on Your Grave. I fucking hate that movie. That is either a 1 or a 2 out of 10 for me, easily. Because it feels more like the director is like, oh, look at my hot wife. She's getting raped by these other actors. And that's legitimately what it feels like. It feels like a porno. It doesn't feel like a film. It doesn't feel like a rape to me in that film. It feels like somebody's getting off to it. With the remake, however, I felt like Sarah Butler gave a better performance. No disrespect to the original actress, but I do think Sarah Butler did a better job. I've seen her in other films, and I enjoyed her in this. In I Spit on Your Grave, and I think the revenge was a lot more satisfying, and it didn't take as long to get to the revenge as it did in the original. With a film like this, I see it kind of similar to the I Spit on Your Grave remake in a way where while at no point this comes off as a power fantasy thing where it's like, okay, I've been raped, I'm gonna kill them all, it doesn't come off as like it's gonna turn into an action film. It just keeps being a thriller. And there are some very intense moments in this film. There's there's a bit where um Gillian Anderson like she finds this rifle that her dad had because he was in the war. And I guess in Britain you get to keep your war rifles. It's in like his house that she ends up inheriting after he dies, and she has a silencer on it somehow. They don't exactly explain where that came from. I can say that's a bit of a detractor, but there's there's a bit where she ends up killing a dog that was there when she was raped, and it's owned by the guy who raped her. And she does this because they would never be able to get into the house to trap him and get the revenge on him if that dog's constantly barking. But then afterwards, you have the daughter of that character say, "The dog's the only good thing in my life. I'm tired of living in that house." And then the film and the characters themselves feel guilty about this. Like, and rightfully so. If they had tried to pass this off as, oh, the dog was evil or something, I think it wouldn't have hit as hard because this makes the characters seem a lot more human. They have human emotions. And of course, Gillian Anderson's character feels bad about doing this, as does Danny Dyer's character. And there's multiple scenes where I feel legitimate tension in the film. There's specifically the part where they kill the dog. There's a later bit where Danny Dyer's character ends up installing security cameras so that he knows when and where the guys will be at any time, and it's very intense. It leads up to a scene that I don't think needs to be there, and it does make Danny Dyer's character very unlikable, where the guy that owns the house, he says his daughter isn't there, and I thought this was insinuating that the guys had sex with his daughter and he was allowing them to because of a debt that he had. They never make it that they never make it fully clear. I think that's what they're insinuating because this film does go to some fucked up places, but at no point does it feel like it's just doing it to be shocking. It feels realistic in the world. And then Danny Dyer goes up to her room, and at first I'm like, oh, he's trying to keep her quiet so that they won't know she's there and they won't hurt her. And then he goes in to like kiss her, and she's underage too. She's 16. And Danny Dyer's character kind of lost me there. And while I still do really love the film, that should have been taken out. I don't understand why that was there. And from then on, I really didn't give a shit about Danny Dyer's character. I was still on board with Gillian Anderson's character. But yeah, I know Danny Dyer's character is supposed to be 23, and it's not as bad as it could have been. I know technically under law it's still pedophilia, whatever. I understand. I literally just said it makes him unlikable. But I don't really understand why that needed to be there. But yeah, and the bit at the end where Gillian Anderson comes face to face with the guy after he's trying to kill himself in a with the car exhaust stuff and he's unsuccessful. Um and I think Gillian Anderson's acting is great throughout this entire film, as is Danny Dyer's. I think she hits her peak here, where she's just reacting to the guy going over what happened that day, and the guy doesn't recognize her at that point because he's still, I'm guessing, recovering from the exhaust poisoning he was experiencing. And it's a very intense sequence as Danny Dyer's character is going up there to try to save her. Um, and as Danny Dyer calls out her name, they kind of have a little bit of a fight, and it again at no point do there's not really a lot of fights in the film. It's not that type of movie, but here it does come off as very brutal, and her way of exacting revenge is something. The reason I brought up I Spit on Your Grave is because it's very similar to a scene from that where she has the sheriff who was paid off to keep the guys from, you know, to keep the guys from getting into prison for what they did to her. She ends up tying him to the table with she ends up tying his legs to the table, bending him over the table, and shoving the rifle up his ass. which I think this could have very easily come off as laughable, but the way that they do it, the way that they don't show too much, you see just enough that you know what's happening, makes it that much more brutal. And you know what? Given what he did, and given the fact that he laughed after assaulting her, I think Gillian Anderson is fully justified. But just as she's about to pull the trigger, she stops and she says, "It's finished. I'm done." And then Danny Dyer basically takes out the guy's eye because the guy took Danny Dyer's eye. And then Gillian Anderson runs out, drives, sees the daughter walking down the road, and takes her and basically um, goes off into the sunset with her to try to find somewhere to hide out or whatever. Excuse me. And then the very last scene of the film is Danny Dyer waiting for the other guys to get there that were part of the group. And he basically takes the rifle, shoots one of them in the head, shoots one of them in the back, and then beats the shit out of them, and then looks at the camera, and then that's the end of the film. Now, the reason I talked about what happened in the film like that, which isn't a usual thing I do in my spoiler reviews, is because this film, this film, first of all, listed on the Blu-ray, it says 80 minutes. This is an 80-minute film, an hour and 20 minutes, which is very short. Not just that, there's 5 minutes of end credits and 3 minutes of beginning credits, meaning this is a 72-minute long movie, an hour and 12 minutes worth of content in this film. The reason I bring that up is because there's two versions of this film, I think. There's an hour and 16-minute version that I think is on Prime and all that stuff, and Tubi had the hour and 20-minute version as was on this Blu-ray because this is a triple movie Blu-ray. But I I think this film flowed very well. It at no point did it feel like it was just trying to keep, because there's certain thrillers like this that are way too long, that are like 2 hours long and have an hour and a half worth of story, and then there's so much padding of people being miserable. There are scenes in this film of people being miserable, but they have a point. They're establishing the evolution of these characters towards the end. Danny Dyer's character starts out as kind of the passive one who doesn't really want to. He's very inexperienced with life. He's a young guy, and he's been hit on by this. Well, I would say older woman, but she's probably in her like late 30s, early 40s. Not really older, but I guess compared to him. Um, and she starts out as the one that's really taking control of things, and she kind of becomes that, but by the end she's like, okay, we've done too much. And then he starts out passive and gets to the point where he's very aggressive in it and wants to get it done. And I think that makes this film a lot more interesting than it could have been, because it very very easily could have been a fantasy. And in this, the characters act like actual people act for the most part. Again, Danny Dyer does a couple of things that don't really need to be in the film. Again, him kissing the girl doesn't need to be in the film. But um, other than that, I think this film is very efficient at what it's trying to do. The score, the score by I think it's Elan Eshkari, who has worked in a lot of films. It's got kind of a techno feel to it, but it also has that menacing and like very stressful tone to it that really accentuates what's happening in the film. Like whenever they spot one of the rapist, or whenever they do all this stuff, I think it actually adds to the tone. And yeah, I think this is definitely a worthy film to watch. Even again, if you're not into this subgenre of revenge films, the rape revenge film, if you're not into films like I Spit on Your Grave, like Last House on the Left, I wouldn't call Mother's Day that. Um, well, if you're into that subgenre and you want one that's a bit less action and more intense thriller, then I think you'll like this. Because this film, while again not being that long, 80 minutes with credits and 72 without, it still gets the point across, it gets done, and it gets out of there. So yeah, that's my review. But last things last, I want to talk about the director. The director of this film is Dan Reed. If that name sounds familiar from recently, you'll know that he's a documentary filmmaker. Documentary. The reason I didn't bring this up in the main talking about the movie is because it has nothing to do with the movie, but I do want to mention it. Dan Reed should stick to stuff like this, dramatic films, dramatic, narratively driven films, and not documentaries. Because I saw Finding Neverland or Leaving Neverland, his documentary on Michael Jackson, and I don't know what the main thoughts are on that, on if Michael Jackson did those things. Um, from what I've seen of actual evidence, which almost none is portrayed in that documentary, I don't believe it, and I think Dan Reed is kind of a scumbag for first off picking two guys who have been routinely shut down because, well, one of them was Britney's backup dancer who um multiple times when drilled about this said nothing happened, and then once he knew there was money to be made, he said stuff happened. Now, I can be wrong. There could always be some legitimate evidence that Michael Jackson did things to these kids, but there can also be legitimate evidence that he was just a misunderstood guy who people walked all over and he could do nothing about it because he's fucking dead. He's not alive to defend himself. So, and his children are getting harassed constantly because of rumors about him that have almost no founding to them. So, Dan Reed, you are a scumbag, but as of now, if there's evidence and anybody wants to link me to it in the comments, go ahead. But for the most part, I have not seen any evidence, especially in the documentary that's like 4 fucking hours long, that when they brought it to the UK, they cut out a bunch of stuff that people were saying there was no founding to, which makes me think that pretty much all of it's unfounded and they only kept in the stuff that's harmless. So I definitely think he's probably a scumbag. He's still a good director for this film, but not as a documentarian at all. But yeah, um, that was my review of Closure. If you've seen the film, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. If you have any recommendations, put those down there as well. And movie reviewer next door, out.